welcome back to Mariana Math Books. My name is Mariana and today I am here with a wrap-up kind of video for a project I'm doing this year about reading fantasy written by women. I would say in general speculative fiction, but I'm mostly going to be reading fantasy because it's what my favorite genre is within the speculative fiction area. So why am I doing this project? If you have seen the corner of Booktube that is called Fantasy Booktube, it is mostly male dominated. Of course there are women, but it's mostly men who are doing the booktubing. Now I want to clarify because this is something that I always think about when I watch those types of videos. I think fantasy booktube is really epic fantasy booktube because there are plenty of women booktubers who read fantasy that are not considered fantasy booktubers and that don't consider themselves part of the fantasy booktube community. I recently watched a wrap-up by Laura at Fantasy Awash, a great channel, one of the examples of female creators in the fantasy booktube space. I'm going to remove the air quotes and I'm going to just say epic fantasy booktube, okay? I know that's not what it's called, but that's what I'm going to call it because I am obnoxious that way, and I just want to clarify that there are female creators reading fantasy. Just for some reason the epic fantasy community seems to be heavily male dominated. Anyway, I was watching this video by Laura at Fantasy Awash, and she was talking about this male dominated space, about feeling the pressure to read the right kind of fantasy. And so within the male dominated creator space, there is also the male dominated author space, where most of the fantasy that is being read is written by men, especially again in the epic fantasy sphere. And don't get me wrong, there are a lot of male fantasy authors that I want to read. There are a lot of series that I have on my want to read list that are written by men, but there are also a lot of series that I have on my want to read list by women. And I feel like there is not much talk about them on Booktube. I feel like other than Robin Hobb, there is not much talk about series written by women. There are certain authors that are talked about and there are certain series that do get picked up. Everyone is reading the Janny Wurts series currently that I also want to read actually, but what I'm saying is that I feel like there are certain authors that are really promoted, but in the majority it is still male authors, and I just want to give more space for women authors. When I first joined Booktube, I actually was doing a project called the Reading Women Project that sadly is no longer around, and that is the first year that I started noticing how many women I read versus how many men. There was a list of prompts, it was a year-long project, and when I first saw the list of prompts, my first thought was I'm going to see what books I already have, I already own, and in general here in my house, in my parents' libraries, I wanted to see what we have. And I was really not pleasantly surprised because when I went to raid our bookshelves, mostly it was men, and that really shocked me. And I wrote to my sister and I told her, oh my god, there are no books written by women in this house. And seeing the books that I read, that I had, I realized that I also wasn't reading a lot of women. I was reading mostly men because it is what is mostly promoted. And I decided I was going to change that. That year, specifically that first year that I did the project, I would only read women, and I would focus, no, I'm only reading women this year. Now I'm not doing it like that, where I'm not only reading women, but I do in its majority try to read women. So it's natural that I would want to transfer that to the genre fiction that I read, because I do notice that when people are talking about, oh, reading more women or women in translation or those types of projects, those types of videos, it's usually literary fiction. So that's what I was doing at the beginning. But then I realized that that's not the majority of what I read. I prefer genre fiction and I love fantasy. And so why not do the same thing with fantasy? And of course, I want to talk about it because I want to have more people doing that. So I'm going to talk about it. Now, you know how much of a commitment phobe I am when it comes to books. I cannot, for the life of me, stick to a TBR. So I'm not going to give you a TBR of books that I want to read. Maybe I'm going to do a video where I have some books that I want to read, but that you know that probably I'm going to end up reading other stuff, or that I'm not going to read everything from that list. But this video is not about that. This video was more like I just wanted to talk about it. I wanted to tell you why I wanted to read it. So that is one thing. That is one reason why I'm doing it. The other reason is that I genuinely, and before I say it, I just want to say, I know there are exceptions. It isn't a rule. I don't want to generalize. Hashtag not all men. But in general, this is me not generalizing. In general, I have realized how much I love fantasy written by women. I just think it's very refreshing. I think it talks about topics that are not usually talked about, or it does talk about topics that are usually talked about in fantasy, but they do it from a different lens, from a different perspective. I was recently watching a video. It was probably a love bomb conversation in Laura's channel, Fantasy Awash, but I don't remember which love bomb because I was binging love bomb. Maybe it was with Jimmy Nuts. Yeah, it was with him. And they were talking about how they are tired of the teenage protagonist in fantasy, the typical stuff that you see all the time. And I was going to recommend, I still have to comment on that video, but you know where I have read storylines that do feature older characters, that feature themes that are different than what we usually read. You know where? Women. Read women. It is so refreshing. And again, I know, hashtag not all men. I know you can find fantasy books by men who do write about adult characters and about other types of topics that are not the norm. But in general, I would encourage you to try some fantasy by women and see how refreshing it can be without losing the stakes and the fantasy. So I'm going to leave it at that because my meeting started 1 minute ago. I'm going. Thank you so much for watching. I'm excited for this project. If you have recommendations, then leave them in the comments. I'm not promising that I'm going to get to them, but I am going to be aware of them. And maybe I'll do a future video where I will share with you some books that I want to read for this project, or authors I want to read for this project. And also I'm going to be doing wrap-ups, not monthly, whenever I have enough books to talk about. So I'm going because my meeting already started. Okay, thank you so much for watching. I will see you in another bookish video soon, and in the meantime I wish you happy reading. Bye.